My name is Terry Gross. I'm going to start out with a short prayer, and then Dave McDermott will introduce our speaker for this afternoon. This is entitled The Stewardship Prayer. Lord God, you alone are the source of every good gift, of the vast array of our universe, and the mystery of each human life. We praise you and we thank you for your tender, faithful love. Everything we are and everything we have is your gift. After having created us, you have given us into keeping up of your Son, Jesus Christ. Fill our minds with his truth and our hearts with his love, that in his Spirit we may be bonded together in a community of faith, a parish family, a caring people. In the name and Spirit of Jesus, we commit ourselves to being good stewards of the gifts entrusted to us, to share our time, our talent, and material gifts as an outward sign of the treasure we hold in Jesus. Amen.
All right, so might not need the mic today, but I'm going to use the mic because just as a mention here, we're going to live stream what Josh is saying today, which has been a really great avenue if you want other members of your prayer groups who couldn't make it today. Such an easy way to hear what was said today. Just go on our parish's website, YouTube, very easy to find, and it'll be loaded up right after the event. So that's a good way for your communities to hear what's said today. So very pleased to have Josh Jasper join us today. Josh is the founder and executive director of Resources United. I've seen Josh work from afar as a connector in Dubuque all over the place, and that's such a valuable thing, to connect people with opportunities, to connect opportunities with people, and Josh is excellent at that. So when we were talking about the ways that our small Christian communities can reach out of this church and into the community, Josh's name surfaced right away, and he was very gracious to be joining us today. So with all of that said, help me welcome Josh Jasper. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm very notorious, or good afternoon, thank you, yeah. So I'm a mover when I speak, so I'm going to be very good today because I know I'm supposed to be on camera. Okay, thank you. But I tend to wander around. So first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I very much enjoy the opportunity to be able to share the work that we do, and hopefully you'll leave here today further thinking about what you can do or what others that are connected to you can do to make a difference in the community. Of course, you're already doing it, but I would just share some more information with you. And so, with that said, maybe before I get into talking about what is Resources Unite, I'll share a little bit about myself and how that got connected to what I do. So I grew up in Farley, went to Western Dubuque High School, and when I was growing up, I knew one thing to be true, and that I was supposed to be a police officer. And so, big surprise, being 6'6", right, 270 pounds. So I loved playing basketball, and I knew I was supposed to be a cop. And so I went to high school at West Dubuque, and then graduated, and then went down to Kirkwood in Cedar Rapids and studied criminal justice, thinking, you know what, I'm going to get an associate's degree in criminal justice, and then I'm going to be a cop. Well, true story. The day I graduated from Kirkwood Community College, I was walking out of the administrative building with my little certificate in hand, and it occurred to me before I got to my van that I actually had no idea how to become a police officer. Like, I didn't actually talk to a police station or officers or anything in the 2 years that I was at Kirkwood. I drank a lot of Busch Light, and I went to class sometimes. And so, as I was making my way to the van, I bumped into a recruiter from the Marine Corps, and I pulled him aside, and I said, look, I have never in my life thought about joining the military, but I'll give you 15 minutes to convince me if I were to join the Marines, how that would help me be a police officer. 15 minutes later, I called my mom, and I told her I'd join the Marines. And so Looking back now 20 plus years ago, it's still one of the best decisions of my life. I kind of figured out who I was as a human being and like what's important to me, and met some really amazing young men and women that I still consider to be my brothers and sisters today. I got out of the Marines though, and then decided, let's have the Marine Corps pay for the next degree, and I went to the University of Northern Iowa to study criminology, thinking, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to be a cop. Well, you're going to see a trend of how I make decisions in life. And so I graduate from UNI. I'm sitting in my apartment about a week after graduation, and I call my mom, and I'm like, Mom, I know I'm supposed to be a cop, but I don't think I'm supposed to do it in Cedar Falls, and I don't think I'm supposed to move back to Farley or Dubuque and do it here. And tomorrow I'm going to pack up my Pontiac Grand Am with everything I can fit into it, and I'm going to move to Los Angeles and join the LAPD. And so you can imagine how that call went, right? But that very next day, never been to Los Angeles. I just knew I needed to go somewhere else and experience something different. And so drove to Los Angeles and found the first police station and started the hiring process. And it takes about 10 months to get onto the police department, so I needed to get a job. And the reason I share my backstory is because the first job that I took in South Central Los Angeles is why I never became a cop and why I've ultimately created Resources Unite. My first job was at a place called the Florence Crittenton Center, in which we housed 52 teenage girls and 12 of their babies, all of which had experienced significant forms of physical and sexual abuse. And for me, it was a real awakening where it was like, I'm not supposed to be a cop. I'm actually supposed to be working with people that have been affected by abuse and violence, and became really passionate and still am in that work. And so continued that work in Los Angeles and decided to go back to go to grad school so I could become a therapist and specifically help people that have been affected by violence. And met my wife. Sarah is from Los Angeles. And we continued to work out there, and then I convinced her, probably the best sale of my life, to move 15 million people to 97 people. We live in Bernard, Iowa, and so we moved back like 15 years ago. And really, that was when my work started. Still did a lot of traveling, helping different communities, different groups throughout really the world, specifically around community outreach, but then violence prevention and leadership development. So started doing some of that stuff. We moved back here, and then I became the director of the Riverview Center, which you might be familiar with, which is the local sexual assault domestic violence agency. Did that for about 10 years, and two things kept on happening when I was at Riverview. People kept on coming to Riverview needing help and not knowing where to go, and it was outside of the scope of what we did. And the other person that kept on coming to me was the person that wanted to get involved into the community but didn't know where to go, outside of, say, volunteering at the Riverview Center. And so at one point, a buddy and myself got together one night, and we were like, let's just create a website and put all 572 different organizations in our community on there and organize it by category. So if hypothetically someone wants to learn about all the homeless service in Dubuque, they could see from the rescue mission to the Teresa shelter to Almost Home, all the different organizations. And so we started there with really the vision of, let's be the volunteer center of the community. Because what we know, and this is really our driving philosophy, and it actually was kind of touched on in the prayer by Jerry this morning, at the end of the day, and research shows you this, at the end of the day in life, people look back and it doesn't matter how much money you have, and it doesn't really matter about the things that you collect. What matters most is that you can look back and that you know a couple of things. One, I was a good dad, or I was a good mom, or something like that. But I also want to be able to look back and know that I made a difference. I want to know that at some point in my life, if I was volunteering at Make-A-Wish or for something that I did, I made a difference in the world. That's what matters most to people. So with that said, though, a lot of people don't know where to start. And so that's really what we became as that starting point 5 years ago, is where the Brian Zeman of the world could come into our office and say, I want to start volunteering in the community. And we get to know Brian, we build a relationship with him, and sometimes the Brians of the world kind of knows what he's passionate about. He might come in and say, Josh, I'm really passionate about homelessness. Like, okay, well, we'll connect you to those 7 different organizations. And, but sometimes, and really the majority of the people that come in now really don't know. They just want to do something. And so I jokingly tell people we're kind of like Match.com, in that we will send the Brian out to a fit, and if it doesn't work, he comes back, and we just get him to that until it lands, until it's like, I'm having a really good experience at the rescue mission or whatever it might be. And so we became that volunteer center for the tri-state area. about 5 years ago. And so we're still very young. And then about 2.5 years ago, Project Concern closed. So Project Concern was the hub of our community. Approximately 1,872 people came into their office 12 months before they closed, needing help. And so we started to see that it was going to happen, that they were going to close. And I just felt kind of called. And much of it, as I shared with my story, there's been times in my life where I was like, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but I need to do this. That was one of those points, too, where it was, we are the volunteer center, but now we need to become both the volunteer and the resource center. And so you fast forward now 2 years beyond that, and there's two different types of people that walk in our door every day. And we're located at 1900 JFK, kind of next to the Village Inn restaurant. But there's two different types of people that walk in our door every day at Resources Unite. You either want to volunteer as an individual or and we help you with that. Or, which is the lion's share of the people that come in every day, the people that need help. And approximately 25 to 30 people per day come into our office that need help. And in order as to why people come in like the Butte community, is housing, meaning they're facing eviction or homelessness, utility assistance, so meaning they don't have heat, food is a big issue in our community, and then usually it's 4, 5, and 6 is abuse, substance abuse, physical, sexual abuse. Now there's, again, 50 other reasons why people come in, but those tend to be the top reasons. Many of them connected to financial, where they're just not, quite frankly, making enough money. And the common script is, I'm working 2 jobs. You know, I'm working at McDonald's, I'm working at different, and I still can't make enough money to sustain myself and my family. And so that's kind of our, but I think it's important to share a little bit about our philosophy as an organization, because we're a very different resource center than other resource centers in the country, which I really pride myself on. And that most resource centers operate like this. If Susie Smith comes into an office of a resource center and is in need of food or maybe is struggling with electricity, you go right to that. We're like, okay, you know what, Susie, let's get you some food. Let's make sure those lights stay on. And kind of the passive message that is sent is, hopefully we never see you again. You know, hopefully this takes care of it and we don't see you again. We're actually the opposite, in that we want to see people again. And so I'll share a real story with you, and that happened a few months ago. Amber came into my office, single mom, 34 years old, presenting with, I haven't fed my kids in the last 2 days, and my electricity's off. And when I say presenting, as you can imagine, when someone comes in our office and they need help, that's the first thing that they're saying is they're leading with what they need. They're in crisis. And so, as a resource center, as what we do though, everything is about building meaningful relationships. So I met with Amber that day and I validated, like, okay, I hear what you're saying, you know, you need some help with food and electricity, but let's go in the intake room. Let's sit down, because I really want to understand who you are as a human being. And so we went backwards, and I shared, you know, I was like, so tell me about you, where'd you grow up? She said, well, I grew up in Dubuque, just with my mom, and I have a sister, and I went to Hempstead, and then I got into a little trouble, and then I had to go to Central, if you remember the alternative learning school at the time, and I got my GED. And she's like, I always wanted to be a nurse, but just kind of got into some trouble. And I've got 2 kids. They're 14 and 10. And, and my 14-year-old just got on the brain injury list. And so I don't know what that means. What's that mean to be on a brain injury list for a child? And she kind of paused, and she was like, well, when my 14-year-old was 1, I was dating a guy, and I went to work, and I came back, and I found out that my boyfriend at the time had taken a hammer to my baby's head. And she started to cry, and she was trying to reassure me that she was a good mom. She was like, know that the moment I found that out, I called the police. I have never seen him since. He went to jail. And, I've done everything I can for him to be able to, be where he's at as a 14-year-old boy. And so I said, okay, And the point of the story is, we gave her food at the end of the day, and we made sure that her electricity was on. But what Amber needed most was the referral to Hillcrest for counseling, because of the shame and the guilt that she's held on to for 13 and a half years for something that she didn't own, for something that she wasn't responsible for, but had become the biggest barrier in her life that she couldn't overcome. She came into our office about a month ago, and she was saying how she's still seeing Jenny down at Hillcrest, and that she's back at NICC. and she's trying to get her CNA now. So for us, we have a lot of internal resources. I've got a food pantry, I've got a baby pantry, free book library, things. And it's not to minimize those things, but those are the Band-Aids. Those are the things that are like those are the fires, like where it's like, okay, you know what, we're gonna make sure you get food. We're gonna make sure that you have diapers for your baby or whatever it is. We're gonna have beds for your kids or something like that. But the heavier work is understanding what got you into a position in which you don't have beds for your children. What got you into a position in which you don't have food in your home? Because if you understand that story, then you can really understand how to help somebody. Outside of that, it really becomes a cycle. It really becomes this Amber, the hypothetical Amber would come into my office every 2 weeks and maybe navigate my food pantry or the Dubuque food pantry or Salvation Army or whatever it might be. But not a lot of people taking a lot of time to get to know her. And the Ambers of the world, and I'm sure every one of you know people like this, there's a lot of people that feel alone. There's a lot of people that feel disconnected in our community. And those are scary times for people because you make scary decisions when you feel alone in regards to how you cope, be that through negative coping mechanisms or just how you feel about yourself. And so much of the time that we spend with people, it's really encouraging them to like, you know, you've been at McDonald's for a year. Like you can do something else. You could be that nurse. But if you've never had anyone in your life tell you that you could do something, you're never gonna do it, right? And so even when the prayer was shared just a bit ago, I was thinking about something I wanted to share with you that I feel like every day for me is a reminder of my privilege and is a reminder of my blessings. Like every day. And we take so much for granted every single day. Like I think I woke up this morning I woke up in my home, like a home I own or pay a mortgage to. I don't have a landlord, right? I live out in the country. I have a privilege of deciding that like I don't want to have neighbors. I just want to live out in the country and be left alone. I have a big lawn. I enjoy that kind of stuff. But that's a blessing. That's something that I have that many people don't have. I have a garage. I went out this morning and warmed my car up to get here. Like I feel like I spend so much time thinking about and helping people think about we have so much sometimes, and there are so many in our community that have so little, right? But now, I'll kind of speak to my team, for example, since I'm the only paid staff on our team, and I have all volunteers that help us, specifically like student interns from Flores College and other places. As you can imagine, when you start on my team, it can be pretty daunting. Expecting you to meet with what 572 resources to connect her based on what she's sharing. And what I remind my team, and I guess I'm encouraging you to know, is the greatest resource is actually connection. The greatest resource that someone might need is to just not feel alone, is to just know that Brian's there. You know, so we've built an organization that simply is reminding people, we're here for you. You know, no matter what, Monday through Friday, no appointment necessary, we want you to come in. We want you to sit in our lobby and tell us about getting promoted at McDonald's. And if you need some more food, fine, take some more food. We're the only organization that, and it's not to be boastful, but it's just to reinforce our philosophy. We have no criteria, meaning most organizations work where it's like you can come to our food pantry and you can't come back for 60 days. You can come to our food pantry and you can't go back for 4 months. For us, if you need food today, I'm going to give you food today, and if you need food tomorrow, I'm going to give you food tomorrow. Because the other part of this is true. There's a whole lot of you in our community that if I ask you, or if you're asked by someone, you'll step up. If I were to send a message out tomorrow to St. Anthony's and say, hey, everybody, our food pantry is really low right now. Could anybody help us out? I mean, I don't know a lot of you, but I do know that by tomorrow night, you would be in my office with a bag of groceries, right? And so there's a lot of great resources out there, people that are want to do really good work. And that's a lot of our work, is trying to connect people to not only the resources, but to the relationships. So that at the end of the day, the Ambers of the world are like, I can do it. I can get through this, and it's not so scary and not so alone in our community. And so I can talk for like hours, so I'm recognizing that I'm kind of maybe rambling. And so any questions for me, maybe about Resources Unite, how you might want to get involved in the community, or maybe questions about a resource that you are involved with, anything like that that I could help you with. Yes, ma'am. You know, yeah, so how do we get our food in our food pantry? Good question. It's a bit of a recipe, and so I'll as I was sitting up here waiting for all of you to get in here, a gentleman by the name of Kurt Owen sent me a message on Facebook while I was sitting here and said, my kids need a humbling experience, and we want to go to the grocery store right now, and would anyone be around in the office, and we'll bring some stuff in. So when I leave here now, Kurt and his kids will come in with some food. Facebook is a powerful engine for us. Like I feel like I can share a story or share a need, and people step up. And so there are some specific churches or some groups and individuals that I feel are pretty active in wanting to help us. I can always rely on St. Stephen's Food Bank. So as a food pantry, we can shop at the food bank, which is out at Cedar Cross Road, which is great because, I mean, I can fill my van up for $40 worth of food. However, and it's not that it's just with St. Stephen's, but the one thing I always remind people about food is this, and it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's true. We're actually feeding two different types of people in our food pantry. One, the person that needs the food, the person that's hungry, but I'm also feeding the person that wants to donate, meaning I'm feeding your soul, because it feels good. It feels good to be able to be like, here's some food. I was at Hy-Vee or Fairway or wherever the other day, and I picked up a few extra things. We want you to feel good. You should want that, right? And so, but there's kind of a hiccup to that because we have a philosophy as well where we will not give anyone expired food. So you can go to a lot of food pantries throughout the country and they give you expired food because of, corporations push dates and things like that. I won't. So if you were to hypothetically come into and drop off some food and maybe you accidentally dropped off something that was expired, that goes to a different pantry. I'm very sensitive to the message that sends to someone because it takes a lot of courage to come into our office, and then I'm sending you out with something that's a year old. And so if I won't give it to my kids, I won't give it to people that we serve. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so the people that help us in the office are a bit of a mixed bag. The majority are student interns, and the majority of those are from Loras College. That's just how it has happened, but we accept from anywhere. But I will say the office team, it's not just interns, it's also just volunteers, where they've said, I'd like to be trained to be able to be in the office and meet with people, to meet with the Ambers of the world, because the team does everything I do. It's not just me and another person that actually does the intakes. And so really their motivation oftentimes is, for students, they may have an expectation. They have to do an internship. But for community members, I think it's just that they want to make a difference, and they have a schedule that allows them to be like, hey, you know what, I can come in every Monday afternoon from noon to 4:30. And so they're a part of that schedule that way. Does that answer your question? Yep. It's for what we do in regards to meeting with people, it's the lesson I learned when I was at Riverview Center, and I'm a slow learner. So I feel like it took me 5 years to learn this lesson at Riverview. When I look back at my time at Riverview, my most important duty as the director of that agency was actually to take care of the people that are actually working with the people. Like, they heard the worst stories that you can imagine. And so, things like vicarious trauma. Like, so if someone shares trauma and you're absorbing it, right? And so you're affected by it. And so it was one of the lessons I learned at Riverview, where now, for example, it's part of the reason that I insist that we usually have 3 or 4 people in the office at any time that can do an intake, because what's your name, sir? If Norm is in my office, and let's say Norm meets with 2 people, and they're pretty heavy stories, they're pretty heavy Amber stories, that's a lot. That's a lot to process. And so Norm gets on the bench, and he's sitting out for a while, meaning now I'm going to meet with a few people, and then maybe Sierra's going to meet with a couple people, and then Norm might be back on deck. Because if we don't do it that way, and if Norm spends 8 hours meeting with 25 Ambers, he's cooked. And he more than likely, he might not come back, to be very honest. And so we try to kind of mix it out, and then at some point during the day, it's like, let's talk about this. How was it? And, to kind of help people process what they're hearing and experiencing. Yes? Yes. So if a group say, want to get involved in the community, do we help with that? All the time. And so from most recent, like the UD wrestling coach to a church group that's saying, hey, you know, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, anyone does that on a regular basis where they're like, we'd like some ideas. Or even some people are like, on February 15th at 8 a.m. for 2 hours, we have 12 people that want to do something. So some people get real targeted, and then they want us to give us some ideas or whatever. And so certainly, so typically, if you were to reach out to me and say, hey, Josh, we've got a group of people that want to get involved in the community. I've got a few questions, meaning how many people, how many hours would you like to do something? Are there a specific interest? But for sometimes it's just like, nope, we're wide open. We'd just like some ideas. Then I usually send 5 ideas to that so to you, and then maybe one hits, maybe it doesn't, and then you just let me know, like, hey, Josh, you know what? I'm real interested in this almost home thing. Then I give you more information and connect you there. You may say, though, you know what? We took it back to the group. We don't really have interest in those things for whatever reason. Can you send us more? And so yes. And then we also have internal volunteer opportunities. And so, for example, one of our programs, Capable, so it used to be a standalone nonprofit. Now it's a part of us, where they connect people with disabilities to volunteer opportunities. They have their workshop in our office twice a month, but we also do that for everyone else. So if, I'm trying to think of something that's coming up. We have a candy cane bombing tomorrow night, and that sounds funny. So I typically clean out the city of Dubuque of candy canes. So right now I have like 5,000 candy canes in my office. But tomorrow night, there's a volunteer opportunity at UD that we partner with them where, and it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's so powerful in that for a couple of reasons. So we take the 5,000 candy canes, we feed everyone pizza and stuff like that, it's fun. But what the volunteers are doing is attaching a little card to the candy cane and some random, like, free coffee at Big Apple Bagel or a couple of free tacos at Carlos O'Kelly's. And then those volunteers go out and canvass the community strategically for me. So they might go out and cover every car at Walmart with a candy cane that has a card connected to it, but they're also going to some other neighborhoods that I don't feel like people know about our organization, because on the card it talks about the food pantry, the baby pantry, how we can help. And I'm going to tell you, on Tuesday of this week, we will have people in our office that are going to say, I had no idea that you have a baby pantry, and let me tell you about, you know, my need or whatever. And so I'm trying to kind of get to the streets with our marketing as well through volunteers to make sure at the end of the day, everybody knows about our resources. Because, and maybe some of you might be thinking about this as a question, when you think about some of the needs in our community, like right now, we have a fair amount of marginalized groups in our community that are really disconnected and are very fearful to reach out. The Marshallese, for example. You have the Marshallese community that's growing in our community, and to stereotype, you've got sometimes 10, 12 individuals living in a home, and they're fairly fearful sometimes to reach out that, you know, the Resources United of the world might judge them or deport them or whatever. And so we tend to try to do more of the, well, we're going to come to you first, and we're going to build some trust so that later you'll come back, you know, if you need help. Does that answer your question? I can give really long answers, sorry. Yes. Yeah, and you know, so I was just talking to someone the other day about building a community garden and how we could help kind of people sustain their own food type of thing. So yes, we have to go backwards from that a little bit though. One of the weaknesses of my food pantry, for example. So I've got a freezer, and I give people proteins like a pound of hamburger or whatever. And I also have a refrigerator that can give people fresh produce and things like that. But here's what I've learned in just the last year. If Mel comes into my office and is struggling with food, and I give him a bag of groceries and has a head of broccoli in it, he may have never had broccoli. He may have no idea how to make broccoli. And so we have to recognize that, where it's like, okay, wait a second. If we're going to give this kind of stuff, we better make sure people know how to use it, right? And so my buddy Chad is the chef at the country club here in town, and he's very passionate and helps me a lot. And one of his ideas is like, you know, let me make a few little easy recipes so that when you're giving out fresh produce, like, here's 3 easy ways to make broccoli, or whatever it is. So hopes, to your Mel of the world would, broccoli's legit. Well, now about putting that garden in your backyard or whatever. So it's interesting how sometimes it's like we got to take it to the very basic level first, and because if you're going to make a garden, like let's make sure you know how to use it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Great idea, certainly. The other piece to that sometimes is reminding that there's a fair amount of people that don't have property. They don't have a yard to be able to do something like that. But there's some really great groups in town that will let you do that. We'll say, so like Cincinnati or in the Washington neighborhood, there's some community gardens. Good question. That's right. Yeah, ISU having the Master Gardener program. Yep, great resource. Yeah, so how are we funded? So here's the traditional answer that I give everyone, and then I'll give you the actual answer. So we're a Dubuque-based nonprofit organization. So as any nonprofit, you sustain yourself through fundraising and grants. Now the reality is, we're still young, and to be honest with you, I don't have time to write a lot of grants, and so it's fundraising. So we do one big fundraising event in April, May, which is the Outstanding Volunteer Award Dinner, and that helps somewhat sustain the organization. The other part of how we stay afloat right now, and beyond, after we become like a toddler of an organization, when I left the Riverview Center, I was making pretty good money, and I jumped into something that had $0. And so it was very much a big jump, but I also knew I still do a lot of that consulting. So for example, last week I was at the University of Oregon training their football team on violence prevention. And so I do some of that work that when the University of Oregon, it used to be when the University of Oregon would have me come out, they were hiring Jasper. Now they hire Resources Unite. And so when I travel, and it's why I'm very finicky about my interns, because I tell them from day one, you're going to be running the show here sometimes. Like I'm going to be in Oregon for a day or two. I have to know that at some point you are able to be here and run it. And so that helps. That's probably 25%. Able to do that. The other part of it is I have purposefully created a really low overhead. The only staff that's paid, and it's kind of a cool story. I was operating in a free space over on Fountain Park, actually close to here, and then my wife's dentist, Dr. Kilberg, just randomly was cleaning her teeth one day years ago, and was like, I've got some office space. Josh is ever whatever. And I didn't pay attention to it for about a year. And then I bumped into him. I said, well, let me see it. And so it's actually the building we're in, behind Dubuque Dental Associates. He had a conference room, much more than what I needed. You can have it. It's been empty for 10 years. You can just, and so moved into that. And then 2 years ago, when we became the resource center, I moved into nonprofits and basically said, like, look, building, and I'll give it to you for $300 a month. It's a nicer office, and you can share what we have. So now I'm in the downstairs offices. I also have offices. The rent that I have to pay for downstairs is by the nonprofits that pay the so right it's zero rent. And so it kind of works to be able to bring them all together. Let's share the resources, lower all of our overhead, and just focus on our mission. So yeah, it's a hustle, to be honest with you. So, any other questions or comments? Yeah, so you may have noticed on Saturdays, I have a half-page ad every Saturday in the Telegraph Herald. It's kind of a cool story. So ITC, Utility Midwest Company, Midwest Utilities. So for years prior to our partnership, they understood the kind of the brand value of we're going to showcase different organizations and connect it to ITC. Well, it became really cumbersome for them because they didn't know the organization. So at one point I just pitched to the TH, I said, let me have a meeting with ITC and I'll do all the legwork. So I'll identify all the nonprofits, but I want the brand. So when you see the ad on Saturday, it's a Resources Unite ad. It's paid by ITC, but I'm showcasing a different nonprofit within the ad. And so for me, the idea is I'm trying to keep RU, Resources Unite, in front of people, but trying to help, like, St. Stephen's Food Bank the other day that we were advertising. And so for us, it's free. So it's a great win-win for us. Yes? Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I will tell you, sometimes I'm just making it up as I go, to be very vulnerable. But every day we bump into something, a different resource that I didn't know about. And I'm full of stories, and this will be my last one. Yesterday, or Friday afternoon, a guy that's probably 65, 70 years old comes into the office, veteran, Vietnam, living in his van. Been living in his van for a while down on 16th Street by the truck stop. And Donna, who is the program manager, so Hillcrest has a program that specifically helps veterans get into housing. Well, as you can imagine, there's always bureaucracy with working with our government, and right now especially, things are very slow in trying to help people. And so Donna brought Ed into my office Friday and was like, we got to get him out of this van. It's, as we know, it's really cold. And I had met Ed before, and so I'm like, okay, let's figure this out. Well, part of the problem was, not really a problem, but the issue is Ed has a dog, a lab that is his best friend, lives in the van with him, and he just won't go to a homeless shelter because a homeless shelter won't take the dog. And so it was actually in chatting with him that afternoon, Friday afternoon, I was like, and this is just me being, because I'm deathly allergic to animals, so I don't have pets at home. I'm like, well, I know there's resources out there that when people go on vacation and they board their animals, I just don't know what that is, And so I randomly called Adam's Pet Hospital on Friday afternoon, and I said, where does someone go, if they need to put their dog up for a few days? Because I was explaining to Ed, I'm like, if we could figure out to put Alpha up for a few days, you can get into the shelter. Ideally, the government will get it fixed, and then you can get into your apartment by Friday of next week. So I called Adam's Hospital, and now me being me, I'm mindful of, I'm going to share the story in hopes that someone there will be like, oh, like that's kind of whatever. And so they shared, we can board dogs, there's a few other places. I'm like, okay, well, thanks for the information. I got off the phone. I continued to chat with Ed. He actually left. Adam's Hospital called me back, and they said, we called Jerry, the owner. I've never met this guy before, and he'd like to put the dog up. And so have Ed come out, and we'll put the dog up, make sure he's completely vaccinated, healthy, whatever, until Ed gets into his new apartment. And so that's sometimes, I would say honestly, 50% of the time, because there's not traditional resources for the Eds of the world. They're just not. So you have to get really creative, and you have to hope that the Jerrys of the world will be like, well, I'll help that. That's easy. I've got an empty kennel space or whatever. And so I feel like a lot of my work long-term is trying to build meaningful relationships with what I would consider non-traditional resources. Like for me right now, a lot of what's in my head is I need to find a motel or a hotel that I can have a really strong partnership with, because people fall through the cracks through sheltering, or specifically women in domestic violence situations. And the organizations that do have the pots of money can't get them out fast enough. And I just always think to myself, we have a lot of hotels in our community, and I know that at least 25% of those rooms have to be open at any given time. And so right now I'm like, if I could just find a hotel that I could get real friendly with the manager, then I could be like, look, I have a very quick connection, get her in the hotel, to stereotype or him. So anyway, I'm not even sure how that was an answer to a question, but yeah, sorry, I can ramble. Other questions or comments? I encourage people to just always stop in, so people can reach out to us on our website. Certainly if you're on Facebook or things like that, make sure you're connected to our page. We're always pushing out different stuff. But just drop in. People drop in all the time and like, hey, I'd like to learn more, things. I jokingly tell people, but it's actually serious. I would not stop on Wednesdays because the Village Inn crushes our parking lot because it's free pie day. Oh my goodness. Like, forget about it. You're not going to be able to park in my office. But Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, you can stop in anytime if you'd just like to see it. People come in all the time and kind of wander around, get a feel for it. And sometimes people just come in like, hey, like Kurt, who messaged me an hour ago, was like, what do you need right now? Tell me. And things change all the time for us, where it's like I told him right now, I'm like, I need hamburger and spaghetti, because I'm always thinking about what feeds people. But it's interesting, just as a side note, we're in the nature of business in which we have to spend a lot of time thinking about things that, like, for example, I have to have a pantry that is full of food for people that don't have electricity. You know what I mean? So like there's 24 people that I know that live in cars right now, and like I can't give them a lot of things that you would give them in a traditional food pantry because you got to heat it up. I can't give them spaghetti. I can't give them a lot of different things. I also have to, like, I love Aldi canned goods because most of Aldi canned goods have the pop top now. A lot of people don't have can openers. Again, back to before, we take so much for granted, right? And I have to be mindful. If I give you a bag of food and some of it doesn't have the pop top, that's not going to get opened. You're not going to eat. And so anyway. Sir. Oh, well, it's definitely, so the question is what percentage are actually working? It's definitely the majority. And there's so many, and this is how poverty works. We have so many myths and misconceptions that people are just kind of taking advantage of. That's about 5%. So it happens, but it's about 5%. But the way we do things, so again, we're very passionate about building meaningful relationships with people, but it's also a passive level of accountability. And what I mean by that is, if Jerry comes into my office today and needs help with food, he's got to go in the intake room, and he's got to meet with me, and we're going to get to know everything that there is to know about Jerry. If Jerry comes in tomorrow and needs something, he goes back into the intake room. And so then it's as silly as it seems, one of my first questions, so what's been going on since we last saw you? And Jerry might be like, well, I just saw you 12 hours ago. Well, we need to talk about that. And we talked 12 hours ago about some of your goals. Let's talk about where you're at with that. People that are trying to take advantage of things, they don't want to do that. You don't want to have to sit down with me or a team and be like, no, I didn't get down to NICC and fill out that application. There is a small percentage, like it's about 5. But the rest of it, honestly, it's the working poor. It's the working poor and they're disabled significantly. You are living off of a disability check of about $755 per month. And they're having to do the math of knowing that I can't work more than 15 to 18 hours or it compromises my disability check. And then I got to figure out, I don't have transportation, so how am I going to find a job that's going to give me 15 hours a week that fits my needs because I'm disabled? It becomes this very difficult path to explore. And then you get into a position, and it's not to excuse it, but you just start living a life in which it's like, I've actually figured out how to live off of $750 a month, and I'm usually sometimes only $100 short. And to stay on the soapbox for a little minute, the future of Resources Unite, not that you're asking, but I think is important, is to help people more long-term in wraparound services. And so we're always going to do crisis management. To think about the lesson in regards to the difference between feeding someone fish and teaching them how to fish, we're always going to feed people fish, and we're good with that. But we are also very passionate about teaching people how to fish when they're ready, right? But not everyone's ready the moment that they come into my office. Amber isn't ready day 1, but day 10 she might be. And then we got to be ready to be like, okay, so how are we going to help you move forward? And the reason I bring that whole point up connected to your question is, and this is just me being me and hearing so many stories, and you would assume that I'm very liberal, which I suppose I am, and this is not going to sound liberal. The way in which we support people through financial assistance through government, say through housing or food stamps or different things like that, if you're not careful, it enables people, right? And so like if you get housing or if you get these different things like cash assistance or things like that, if someone isn't working with you on a regular basis, what's the motivation to get off of it? If now I'm like, okay, well, and now if I do, and there's a lot of people that do get off of it, but then it's called the cliff effect, right? So I'm on housing, I receive all this assistance, but now I start working into a better job, and this starts going down. And so now I'm working, but I'm getting less assistance, and there's this space that's called the cliff effect in which I'm struggling more now, and it's more difficult for me to see the bigger picture because I'm still in it. I'm still in the crisis. And I don't really have anyone by my side that's like, we're going to really hold your hand. We know this is scary right now, but we got to get over here because you've proven for 10 years you can't sustain yourself over here, right? Like you can't get your kids to school. You're not feeding your children. But how do you get through the scary time in which you're starting to let go of that assistance and get over here to the even $15 an hour job? That's tough, especially if you're the script of I'm a single mom of 2 to 3 children in which the father is not present, which is a whole huge issue in our community in regards to where did we learn as men, I'm going to go there, but like to not be fathers. Like that script over and over in my office where I'll ask people, ask moms, I'm like, well, where's dad? Oh, well, he was gone the moment the baby happened. Like I oftentimes think about that. Like what point in our history did we start sending a message to young boys that it was like, you don't have any responsibility here. You don't have to stay. You don't have to, like we have to fix that. We have to kind of have a more empowering message for young men to be like, look, like this is your child, right? So anyway, as you can see, I can preach. So, anything else? Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I have to do that. I just had it last week with a young lady where I'm like, and it's always very respectful. It's not easy, but I'm like, because we have a database I bought from Chicago where it tracks everything. So if you come in, I can see everything that we've learned about you every time that you've come in, because I'm trying to capture a really full story about who you are. But it also then is kind of like, so for that young lady, I was kind of like, okay, Cindy Lou, you've been here X for diapers. We really, this doesn't work. The easiest way for me always, I just remind people, we are an organization that serves the entire community, not just you. Like, how could I possibly help people at that level, for everyone? And so, for most, it kind of helps people, and everyone's always like, you're right, I gotta figure something out. You know what I mean? Again, back to the conversation about what we take for granted. I've lived a life in which I've always had someone in my life that has held me accountable, right? There's always been my mom or dad or somebody that said, hey, wait a second, like, that's not okay or whatever. There's a lot of people that don't have that don't have someone to say, wait a second, that might not be the right path, But when you do it, most times people are like, oh, yeah, you're kind of right? So. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Mary, do we have the... Yes, they're in the pews. So if you take a second to fill out an evaluation, not only for today, but then any future gatherings we might have of this and topics. But what a great experience, Josh. Thank you for joining us. Such a wealth of good stories and knowledge, and it's just inspiring up there to hear all of it. So if we could thank Josh one more time, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. And if we could just have the evaluations back when you get there, and otherwise, stay warm and be safe. Thanks, everybody, for coming.